live and recording.
Namaskar everyone and a very good afternoon. Swayambhu is a social movement for the academically unfulfilled youth to seek internship in the career of your choice. And what we do is to help you understand different industries and all the challenges and prepare for it. We invite Swayambhus who will guide you, educate you, inspire you, and lead the way, sharing glimpses of their professional journey and what made them the master that they are today in their respective fields. So, we have a wonderful guest today. Again, another Swayambhu with a silver sharp mind and a golden heart. Let's interact and welcome Agnello George, sir, who is focused, ethical, dynamic, and a whiz at strategies. Namaskar and welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sangeeta. Thanks for the opportunity to share my journey with a lot of people who possibly would take something out of it. And I think your introduction was not right. I'm still a student. I'm still learning.
Sir, you are very humble, and all the times I've interacted with you, I have understood you are very transparent, very honest, and you mean everything that you say or type. Sir, so I will start with the basic question of how to go about on career in sales. This is for our aspiring Swayambhus, and then slowly we will escalate to other verticals and levels of sales, sir.
Sir, somewhere I think, yeah, go on.
Yes, sir. Sir, a youth who is generally in the age of 20 to 30 on the brink of selecting his career is always confused on, is sales the best choice for me? He doesn't know whether he has it in him. So is there a template or a checklist which I can study on my own and understand whether sales is the right field for me? And if I do select, then what is that the companies look for when they recruit people in sales?
Let me put it the other way around. I think the starting premises have to be very simple. My philosophy on life is that there is so much money going around in the world. You need to figure out a way of making it pass through your hands, and some of it will then stick. Either you can do business when the money passes through and the profits stick to you, or you work in a career in different responsibilities, and the scope of your responsibility increases, more money passes through your hands, and obviously some of it will stick. So sales is one such career. I would put sales and marketing in that domain where you can practically get a lot of money passing through your hands. So that's a starting premise. Now, a lot of people tend to confuse selling with aggression. A one-time deal. Somehow I do a deal and run away from here, disappear. No. Sales as a career is about helping people buy wisely or choose wisely. It's about building relationships. It gives you a scope to travel around the world, see places, interact with people, and genuinely it helps you, gives you a chance to help people. So it's a career which is, it has not just got a commercial side, it has also got a very large human side to it. Because if you look at any large corporation, the significant number of people are in two buckets, in sales and in manufacturing. Okay, any organization you take, that's how it is constructed. So it's a very large pool of talent. That means you're working with a lot of colleagues, a lot of seniors, a lot of juniors at some point of time in your life. So it's also about helping this entire ecosystem move up and mature in a very big way.
Sir,
so let me start. You asked me a question whether what do an aspiring guy look for? I mean, I come from a very small town. I grew up in a very small town in Kerala. And when I finished my graduation, all you had was a lot of aptitude to learn and a lot of fire in the belly, nothing more than that. Now, interestingly, sales, if you ask me, is also a profession where qualifications really don't matter. I mean, I started my career with a BSc in zoology, and I do something very different now. The only thing I was keen was I wanted to interact with people, and somewhere there was a curiosity about trying to understand things. So I started my life with pharmaceutical business with Boehringer, who were leaders in diabetes and cardiac research. So I still remember my first calls, my first doctor whom I gone and met, Dr. Radhakrishnan in Tirunelveli, and so on. And see, when you look at it, your domain expertise comes over a period in time. And it just doesn't happen that way. It doesn't happen that you enter into a job and you know everything. You need to be humble enough to understand that the organization existed before you. It is giving you an opportunity to become part of it. I'm talking about the inception stages. You really don't know anything about that industry. I mean, if you're talking about your 20, 25-year-old people trying to get into a career, what do they know about any function? Forget about sales, any other function. Somebody needs to teach you, and you need to have a mindset for learning. Both need to kind of go in together. So if you ask me, if you were to sum up this entire phase of life, it's about where and how you start don't really matter. What you do with the opportunities is all that matters. Okay. And somewhere in sales, people are different, and so are mental outlook of people in terms of how they would love to be in what kind of sales. Now, imagine a farmer who's rearing flowers. Okay, he has got X number of plants in his field. Let's say rose plants. So every morning, each rose can generate only so many roses, which means there are fixed number of returns at the end of every day. So there are salespeople who are content with a good day's, output. I feel happy every day because I'm cutting the roses, selling them, earning a profit. That's one kind of a mindset. There are people who enjoy it. Then there are those people who are like fishermen, who angle for a big fish and keep waiting and waiting and waiting, and finally, when you get it, you feel very happy. Then there are those people who are hunters. You want to really go and attack a big game. Now that's a lot of challenge because you have to keep watching. You have to play games with the big game. I'm talking about big game is really the days when you're allowed to hunt in a place like India, or where it's allowed now in Africa. So it's about a mindset where I want to go for the big kill. Doesn't matter. I've gone 7 days without any business, but on the 8th day, I'm going to come with a big kill. Now, in a sales industry, this is about the way it kind of plays out is, let us say, an FMCG salesman. It's something like a farmer who's cultivating flowers. The guy in high-end industrial selling, where you're trying to tie up with an OEM deal. Then that's like a hunter. You're running after the big game, and once you crack that account, you're walking out with crores of rupees of orders in your hand. So the mindset becomes slightly different. So you have to decide what suits your personality and try and approach that kind of a career. Okay, intrinsically, are you a farmer? Are you a fisherman? Are you a hunter? And then your adaptation, your chances of being successful as a salesperson would possibly be better.
Correct. Perfect, sir. Sir, your analogy has made it very clear to all the laymen who are not very well versed in jargons and big words of sales. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Thank you, sir. Sir, when you joined this company, this was the first time you were checking out sales. So what were your learnings in the first 6 months, which was so crucial, and you got this mindset that this is my field and this is what I should do?
See, I was a naturally curious guy, so I wanted to understand pharma. And what humbled me really, I mean, just think of it, a kid out of college who think he has arrived in life. But when you get out there in the marketplace, you suddenly discover that your customers and your doctors and pharmacists whom you're interacting with, they're all far more knowledgeable than you. And that was quite a humbling experience, if you ask me, because you really understood that you need to learn and learn and learn. And that was the first learning, if you ask me. That was the first thing which hit me. Okay,
Right.
I need to have a lot of learning to go on. So the first 6 months of my career, if you ask me, was about trying to learn the domain. But one thing was very clear to me: while they knew about their industry, about products, about categories, about diseases and the cure methods, I knew I had a chance to know best about my own product and how to pitch it. So I understood that's what makes a difference. And secondly, what I understood early on in my career, I think it's good that I started in pharma. Pharma is a lot about relationships. While there could be multiple companies who are meeting doctors with the same kind of a molecule, it's your regularity, your discipline in your work, your communication, the kind of relationship which you establish with the doctor or with the chemist or within your own groups of colleagues. That's what finally turned out to be the key leverage points.
Sir, you are close to like 4 decades of experience with industry leaders in FMCG, pharma, and lifestyle products. So the dynamics for each industry is different. So when there are circumstances which are changing, different circumstance altogether, how do you adapt? And at a senior level, it is important to give directions and perspective to your people. So how do you ensure that your people, your team of every vertical is encouraged to adapt to the change very quickly and efficiently?
See, the dynamics are indeed different. Let's take pharma. Like I said, the customers are always more knowledgeable. Okay, we must factor that at the back of our mind. And there are dramatic new innovations which keep happening. So you need to be keeping in pace with that. You can't be landing up at a doctor and having a conversation when the doctor brings up a new development that has happened in the market and you don't seem to know about it. It looks very silly. So you need to be kind of constantly updated. FMCG business, on the other hand, was all about consumers, about brands, about the channel interplay. See, you can attract a consumer with a product, you crafted a product and put it in the market, communicate it in the right platform. But if it's not available within arm's length of desire, then you lost the business.
Right.
So you need to do all these things simultaneously. In fact, FMCG, if you ask me, gives the largest scope in terms of the interplay of all the elements. If you look at lifestyle, it is slightly different because I worked in Parrywear, who are the leaders in sanitary wear. Now, the shopper experience really mattered over there. The reason is people don't buy sanitary wear every day. You buy a toothpaste once in 10 days. But a sanitary wear, you buy once in a lifetime. So, which means when a consumer is walking into a showroom and you are able to grab him, or you lost him for life. Because that was one occasion the guy gave you a chance to interact.
Correct.
Okay. So it was a very crucial point. So I used to keep educating my people. Listen, when the customer is walking in, this is the only chance you have got of converting that customer into a product. He may not even walk in through these doors again in his life. So it's a one-time opportunity. It also had a dimension of influencers, the architects and the plumbers and the people who really define. Suppose a big building is coming up, then the architect decides which kind of a stuff will go well with the kind of design he has crafted.
Right.
So you need to keep influencing them. You also need to keep educating them. I mean, we used to have plumber programs, I recall. A Parrywear plumber walks into a house. When he walks out, he needs to clean the bathroom, because one thing the housewife used to hate is a plumber, dirtying the entire way, all the way from the bathroom to the main entrance. So we used to train people more than the technical competence. This behavioral aspect about cleaning and leaving no dirt anywhere after the work was extremely important. So it is not about aggression. I mean, I'll give you an analogy or a small experience I have had. I lived in Chennai during my Hindustan Lever days for about 5-6 years.
Hmm.
There used to be a shop called Brute in Monteith Road in Madras. A gentleman called Sethi. He had a textile showroom. The first time I went there, what struck me was this guy was never trying to sell you. He was only helping you choose.
Okay.
And there are times when you walked in and he looks at you and says, "Sir, I'm sorry, I don't have anything for you today." I mean, imagine a shopkeeper actually telling you that I don't have anything for you today because the kind of stuff you look for, I think you have bought most of it. Today, I don't have anything. But sir, hold on. I will show you something which is new, but I don't think it will suit you, but still see it. I mean, he had such a great way of selling. I used to send a lot of people out there. Learn how to build a relationship and sell from a guy who sells textiles. It used to be amazing. Because that gentleman understood something called a lifetime value of a customer. He understood customer walking in, I just want to convert him and grab some 5,000 rupees from him. No. If I build a relationship, if I earn that trust, then the guy is going to give me 50,000 rupees over the next 5 years. So that was very, very, very interesting. And he had trained his staff exactly that way.
Sir, you are very observant, and like you mentioned right at the beginning, that I consider myself as a student. So most of the people, when they escalate to success, they become very complacent. So there are people. Just a minute. Yes, sir. Should I?
No, it's okay. A call came in.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, sir. So when you're observant, you understand different things. But when you're complacent, you may not even see the obvious. So how do you take care that you are keeping yourself fresh and anew for new ideas and new things? How do you have that mindset or keep it?
I mean, if you really ask me, I remember Sherlock Holmes, A Study in Scarlet, I think was a book. There's nothing new under the sun. It's all been done before. Which means everything that's happening has happened in one way or the other. Okay. It is just that it's repeating in a different form and shape and a different context. I used to be in the early days of my work, till almost recent, till the time when things started coming on the digital format, I used to have a huge collection of articles and paper cuttings, a big archive. In fact, a lot of my friends who used to go for various interviews, if they didn't know about a particular company, they used to call me up and say, "Can you send me that particular company's folder?" And I'll send it to them, so they're completely updated what happened historically and what happened in the recent past.
Right.
I used to read a lot. I think that is something which helped me. I remember in my early days in pharma, it's a very relaxed kind of a work. Most of my friends used to keep playing cards in their spare time. I used to actually travel about an hour and a half to a place in Trichinapalli. I used to be in Tanjore, and Trichy was about an hour and a half away. There used to be a lending library. I think in an year and a half, I must have finished all the books in that library. So that was interesting because I think it gave me a lot of learning. The second aspect was you require a lot of mentors because somewhere you need to seek and cultivate mentors. And God has been kind to me that a lot of mentors came my way, and they really helped me. Right from my first bosses who taught me about pharmaceutical industry, to my first boss in Unilever, I remember teaching me about the discipline and about the values in life and how that is important.
Right.
And people teaching me multiple things. So every stage, I think I need to be grateful to the mentors who kind of helped me. If you ask me what helped, was just keeping the mind open, being curious. I kept asking questions, and that kind of ensured they supported. What happens? I've also seen this, the question which you raised, why people don't seem to move up in life and why they kind of stagnate.
Right.
I've seen in sales after a 5 or a 10-year kind of a horizon, people kind of think that, yes, I think I have understood whatever is to be learned. So it is just that the company should keep promoting me. Okay. Now, I have a different analogy to explain this. So a lot of people used to come and ask me, boss, why are you not promoting me? I'm doing so well. I've done so well for 10 years. So why are you not promoting me? So I have an analogy on this, which is about, let us say a guy is very good in riding a bicycle. Extremely good. Okay. In common parlance, he becomes the ustad of cycling.
Right.
Then he comes and says, why is the company not giving me a motorcycle? Company should rightfully give me a motorcycle. Now, when you look at it, there's a new dimension in a motorcycle, okay, which is about auto-generated power. You are not pedaling and creating power. There is a power which gets generated in the engine, and you need to harness that power.
Correct.
Now, if you have not learned that skill, and just being an ustad in cycling, you get onto a motorcycle, you're going to end up in a disaster. Okay. So this, let's say, is the first stage. But can you learn motorcycling? Yes, of course. Sit behind somebody, understand how it goes, practice a little, and then you're on. Okay. Now assume that this guy has moved up in career, become a motorcyclist now. Now, after a few years, he says, now I'm become a hero in motorcycling. It's time the company has given me a four-wheeler, a car. Okay, interesting. Now, is a car very similar to motorcycle? He says, yeah, this has got two wheels, that's got four wheels. How does it matter? Now, suddenly, unlike a motorcycle where you can put your feet on the ground and turn it around, in car, you happen to be sitting in one corner and trying to assess how the other corner moves.
Right.
So, now a new dimension of space has happened, which means what? As you move up in career, your actions have got an impact beyond just your immediate. It's also going to impact your stakeholders, your ecosystem at large, and you need to be conscious of the moves you make, because it can go and hit somebody, or you can hit a pole and damage yourself. So there's a dimension of space which comes at that level. Now, unless this guy is preparing himself for it, learning that, should company give him a car, or he should be content driving a motorcycle? Now assume he has learned the car, now he has started driving. Now he says, okay, the next grade available is a trailer truck driver. So he says, how does it matter? I'm anyway driving a four-wheeler, just that it has got a few more wheels extra. But is it that? No. I think there is something, a new dimension called timing, which is important, because you are turning your
Trailer.
steering wheel, but the trailer moves slightly differently. Okay, so there's a lag effect between what you do and what happens behind. Now, that means as you move up in the layer, you need to know that, okay, my end objective is this, but I will have to do it this way so that my end objective gets achieved. So somewhere, unless a person really imbibes or kind of takes it inside, internalizes this, he will still keep cribbing, and he will say, why is the company not promoting me? Okay, I'm an ustad in cycling. So I used to keep telling people, don't be an ustad in cycling, learn motorcycling. Okay, so it's a simple analogy, but I think this is exactly what happens to a lot of people.
So it is simple but extremely powerful analogy. And I think everybody has understood the bottom line and the soul of what you have mentioned just now, sir. Sir, I request you to share some details about how did you achieve the title Unilever Central Asia Middle East Innovation Award, sir.
Okay. If you ask me how, that was just kind of keeping the antenna or the ears close to the ground as to what is happening. This was in the late 90s. Okay. Now, what was happening at that time, the market environment was kind of changing. On one hand, modern retail was happening in the south of this country with, I think, Food World and Spencer's. They were the early harbingers, and Nilgiris was always there. So that kind of gave an insight, and I came from Madras branch to Bombay branch in Hindustan Lever. So when I landed up in Bombay and I was handling Bombay City at that time, the market environment was kind of changing.
Yes,
What
sir.
struck me was that in Bombay there is a large set of accounts which were significantly large, and there were very small accounts. Now the large accounts required a different kind of handling, okay, for you to kind of harness that potential. So that put together a key accounts program which we put into place in Bombay City. It required a technological backup because in those days we did not have distributors who were computerized. So I said, okay, let us not look at changing them. Let us create a middleware kind of a solution where let them use whatever they are using. I just map it and get an output which is my requirement. And that kind of motivated the entire team. Now in this process, two things happened. I mean, I discovered that my people were not computer savvy in those days. Now, how do I teach people who are sales guys to learn computers? They will say, when are we going to learn? Okay. No establishment is open after the evenings. So I said, doesn't matter. So we got a place near Chembur station where we hired a warehouse, put about 12, 15 computers, got a trainer who will come from 6 in the evening to 1 o'clock in the night. And my team could book slots and come and keep learning. So in about 6 months, all my guys, and they were the first team in Bombay branch of Hindustan Lever to be fully computer conversant with all kinds of office software and everything else. So this also made this entire project of key account and their tracking and execution well orchestrated, because guys knew what kind of data they're generating it from, how they could themselves generate and analyze it. So it really kind of helped. So this entire scheme of activities in Bombay City was a harbinger of a key account approach in Hindustan Lever for the later days. So the award was fundamentally about creating that innovation with all kind of limitations about technology and anything else. We found via media solutions.
Right. Sir, so you very correctly mentioned that it is not just overnight that you can adapt to change. It has to be a process which is thoughtful, and you know exactly where we are and where we want to reach. Sir, how important is conviction in sales? And what do you think is the role of quality, especially in consumable durables, etc.?
I mean, I'll just refer to something which used to be a business philosophy in Parryware. Okay, Parryware is the leading sanitary ware brand in the country, and the reason really is about the quality philosophy of the company. We never had seconds. Okay, if it doesn't meet the criteria for the first quality, then the balance pieces are taken out and broken. It is not put on a different sticker and sold. It used to hurt economically, financially. It used to hurt because you are destroying reasonably okay product. But we said no. There is only acceptable quality and not acceptable quality, and that's a philosophy of an organization which is amazing. So we used to always command a premium in the market. When you go to an architect, the architect knew that Parryware had only one quality and the rejects are broken. And we used to have a Hitachi machine in our factories just to break the sanitary ware which is not meeting the quality. There'll be one black dot in one corner. Only our quality guy will discover it, but that's not acceptable. It's broken. Now that's a philosophy of an organization driven from the top, absolutely from the top, from the promoters. And that helps cement that premium positioning in the market. Same is true even for a service product. Because at the end of the day, the consumer experience is not just buying a product. It's also about using the product and how an organization actually responds to it. It's like you become comfortable going to the same Kirana store. Why?
Because he gives us personalized or customized service. Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's a personalized attention which you get. In this case, the attention could be about a time-bound attention which you are reassured with that kind of product category. So that is when you feel happy interacting with that company. It's extremely important.
Right. Sir, you mention about a lot about keeping the consumer happy by connecting with them. So, but when things are very normal, hunky dory, it is easy to be there always. But in case of adverse circumstances, say you are out of stock and it is festival time. So, has there been any adverse situation which you have handled differently, and it has given you some unexpected results, sir?
Hmm. Okay. Uh, See, these are almost day-to-day challenges. What you spoke about are stock availability, about production goof up somewhere, or the transit delays, uh, or your own distribution system kind of winding up in a place and you're not able to get a replacement distributor very quickly.
Right.
Or you have a service engineer team which is left in a place and suddenly you're finding a vacuum, you need to kind of replace people over there. These are typical challenges of business. Okay. But let me give you an example of an adverse situation and something good comes out of it, because I'm a firm believer that in every adversity there is an opportunity which is there. You need to keep desperately looking for it. I think it was in 2009. There was a scarce rainfall in the country, and it was almost, I think, close to 450 districts in the country were drought stricken, declared as under drought.
Right.
So I was traveling to some and generally there was a skepticism in the company that business is going to be down because it's going to be economy is going to be down, lesser cash flows, and all the associated pieces. So I was traveling someplace and I was asking the rural guy. It was a rural market and I was working in the rural market. So I was asking that guy how's business and how's life, etc. And there was a farmer also sitting in that shop. So I was asking him, what is the scene? He seemed extremely bullish. Now, that was very surprising. So then I asked him, so he said, no, my prices of the produce have actually gone up by about 15%. Wow.
Okay.
That was very curious. So I said, okay, what is the kind of cultivation you do? How many bigger land do you have? How much do you sow? What is the kind of output? And, you became curious to understand.
Right.
So then I said, okay, let me actually go and see a few farmers. From the market, I told my guy, I want to see some big farmers around here and try and understand what is happening. I also want to go to the mandi and speak to some brokers who are, the typical brokers who are in the APMC kind of agriculture produce marketing yards. Met them. People in that market were very bullish. They were very happy. So I said, what the hell is this? The general perception is that the rural is bad, but these guys are saying good. Then when I was coming out, I could figure that what is the reason for it was an irrigated part of the rural markets.
Okay.
Stuck me. So I said, okay, now let me go to a non-irrigated part, which is in Nagpur side. I traveled around, got the despondency very clearly articulated by every person I met. Then I went to Haryana, again irrigated parts of Punjab gave me the reassurance that there was a distinct difference between an irrigated rural market and a drought-stricken rural market. So what I found was the irrigated rural was actually becoming more prosperous. So I came back to office, got my team together and said, let us create a strategy where we're going to attack the prosperous parts of rural and actually sink in investments. So that was about putting another 2,000 people on the ground, crafting a distribution system on the ground, creating technology enablement. And I put a docket and I said, I need so many crores of rupees for this action, but I will also optimize my people, my manpower working. So they said, this is interesting. This is a contra thinking. So they wanted me to present to the board. I went and presented to the board. They grilled me. And obviously, finally, they said, yes, it looks interesting, because I said, I am not going to focus on the entire rural. I am going to focus on X number of districts in this country which are prosperous, only X number of villages. But those villages, I'm going to put manpower from that village. I'm not going to put a guy working, let us say, in a Meerut to go and work in a Bhagpat. I'm going to recruit a guy from Bhagpat. So my resourcing model had to be a son of the soil.
Correct. Wow.
Okay. Now, this brilliantly worked for us. And I said, we are going to put in brand communication on the ground. That kind of fueled, or let us say, we could capitalize whatever the additional income which was being generated in these markets, it could channelize it into our brands. And I think it continued the growth trajectory for us. It was the biggest growth bucket for the company for the next 4 years. So it was an interesting, curious discussion in the market. But only thing, you kept your antenna up. So it was an interesting observation. And that I think, in fact, featured in Harvard Business Review as one of the successful case studies in India distribution.
Wow. Sir, so you actually analyzed the situation and checked out what is most fertile at that point of time. And
yes, I discovered that the scenario showed me there is a prosperous rural and non-prosperous rural.
Right.
And people were generally switching off to rural, saying that abhi drought hai, rural mein kuch karna nahi hai. But I said, then if people are switching off, there's an opportunity for me to step in and grab everything what is coming over there.
Right, right. So you connected with the farmers yourself, but please share if people like you, they connect with people, right? They get the right information. But what is the importance of research and data analysis in other companies where they don't go themselves to check it out?
No, each company has its own way of gathering information, okay, and processing information. So I would actually leave it to the particular context, because each company's industry is like very different.
Right.
Okay, for example, a sanitary ware industry is very different from a pharmaceutical industry. Okay, in pharma again, I mean, I'll give you another analogy. For example, we had an Ayurvedic business in Dabur. I had gone to a place called Gaya, and there was a distributor. I was asking him, you tell me which are the doctors who are writing this particular Asav. Okay, I would like to go to him and ask him what indication is he writing it for, because you seem to be selling a lot of it. Now, he was not willing to give me information. He was not willing to give me information because he thought information was power.
Right.
Okay, and a lot of people in certain industries at the front end in sales actually think that not sharing information is making them indispensable in an organization or non-sackable in that kind of a parlance. It's completely wrong. Because the information, when it flows up, okay, the companies would be able to form strategies around it. Because if somebody is prescribing a particular medicine for a different kind of an indication, either it's a mistake or it's an opportunity. Either of it is important to understand. Okay, so sometimes people get colored in the front end by just sales happening or not happening. I think it is important to question as to why it is happening and why it is not happening, either way, and to understand this. But I've also understood that over a period of time, it is not just data or data which is being collected. It is actually how you distill out information from the data. I'll give you a curious incident. When we took over the Ayurvedic business and integrated into the main consumer group in Dabur, it came with a huge baggage of 1400 SKUs, with seasonality, with very high regional SKUs. Some products used to sell only in 5 towns in the country. And I needed to remember, because if you're leading the business, then you need to be able to give direction to people. You can give direction when you understand.
Right.
So there was this time when you were trying to look through spreadsheets and trying to understand, okay, this particular product, this is how it moves, this is where it sells, trying to understand. Days were going in there. My typical start pattern was I'll go to sleep and then get up around 1 o'clock, and 1 to 3, 1 to 2, you sit and go through. So this happened for a few days, and my wife came and said, what the hell is happening? So I said, no, I'm trying to understand. So I showed her, this is how it is. And it's very difficult to understand because there are so many items and so many different dimensions which are acting on it.
Right.
So she said, there must be another way of looking at it, isn't it? So I said, there is no other way. Excel is the only way. And I went to office. But this kept ringing at the back of my mind. There must be another way of looking at it. So on the second day when I came back, I said, way of looking at it means what? Okay, let me just put it on look at the different meanings of looking at it, and one of the things which came up was visualization. So I said, wow, okay, now it gives me a thread to look for. So we kind of narrowed down onto, I said, okay, let me check out data visualization. What are the kind of tools in the market? This is early 2000s, okay? 2000, sorry, late 2000, 2010 or something, 10 years ago. So I discovered a particular application, downloaded it into my phone, came to office next day, got my guy to kind of port everything into that. And bingo, you had it. You could digest that information through very highly visual kind of templates, which communicated the story in a second.
Right.
And then I wrote it out across the company. And when the guy actually came to present, he was surprised that I was using it for 2 years already in my phone. So it was the trigger was actually, isn't there another way of looking at it?
Right, right. So when you have your radar very alert, I think ideas just come to you because you are receptive. Sir, you mentioned that, yes, you mentioned that, we should share information in all our departments concerned if there is something amiss. But has there been any situation where something was amiss and you had to share it with your customers, sir?
No, I don't think there has been any major, you are talking about a mishap of some kind. No.
No. Say you were out of stock and, you didn't know how to coordinate or communicate to the customers who were waiting for it. Not just the direct customers, say your retailers, your distributors. You didn't have enough stock.
Okay. So, let me relate one very nice incident. Long time back, very long time back, in my early stage of career with Unilever, I used to be in Kerala, and we had this festival called Onam, which is the biggest festival in Kerala.
Right.
And in those days, stocks were in short supply because it was a license Raj. I'm talking about the pre-91 period. Okay. So we had no toilet soaps in stock. All I had was 2.5 kilo Vim powder and I think 2 kilo surf. That is all what was there. So my distributor told me, sir, you want to go to the market today? And that was 3 days before Onam, peak selling period. If you go to market, people are going to beat you up. I said, no, us Hindustan Lever, we are disciplined. We should go to the market. Exactly, visit all the outlets in that beat. So I said, let's go to one beat. I'll accompany you. So I said, okay, come. So I said, all vehicles must leave and I'm going in one vehicle. So I went in one vehicle. And I think that must have been the day of my maximum abuses in my life because all 40 shops, I think, abused me. Okay. Because I said, why the hell have you come? If you don't have anything to sell, why did you come? So I said, no, as a company, it's our discipline to visit you. I don't have stocks. I come to apologize. I also come to wish you happy Onam. But there are 2 products I have. Can I try selling them to you? And believe me, we actually sold it out. We returned with an empty van. Now it so happened that, and I was feeling, actually after 5 or 6 outlets, you kind of mentally, you were drained out because every guy was, just abusing you. After some 15 years, when I came back into South, I was heading sales for detergents business. Then I visited this market. And I was working with the Kerala team and I was coming up towards this main town. Then this particular big shopkeeper, so he called me my name. So I was stunned because I said, how the hell this guy knows my name unless somebody has briefed him. So I said, how do you know my name? Did the guys tell you my name? He said, no. Sir, you may have forgotten many, many years ago. Okay, I think more than 10. Actually, it was 15 years. You came here in an Onam and you articulated the philosophy and the discipline of the company. Despite not having stocks, you came and met us and wished us. After you left, I realized that I actually was very uncharitable to you. You were only trying to do your duty. Okay, anybody in your place would have not worked the market on that day and disappeared. Okay, so it was interesting.
Nice. Sir, so you left such an impact on that distributor that even after so many years, he could recollect you, your name, right?
That was
so you reacted rather, you responded rather than you reacted.
Yeah. These are the nice things at the end of a career because I mean, I used to meet Mr. S.M. Datta, who used to be the chairman of Hindustan Lever. At least once in 10 days, he used to come to Bangalore when I used to work there. And I was supposed to receive him and send him back. The one quality about him, because I used to always ask him, sir, can I have your bag? He will say, no. God has given me health to carry my bag. I got two good hands. Just walk with me. Now, that is something which kind of stuck me. And believe me, I don't allow anybody in any company to touch my bag because I keep telling them, thank you. I got my hands. I'm fit enough to carry. I think these are some of the things which stay with you because the kind of impact people make in terms of the values they are trying to communicate. Because I think the only respect you command at the end of a career is not the positions you have held, but the kind of integrity in your actions and the kind of values you've demonstrated.
Sir, like I mentioned earlier, you give a lot of importance to value system, ethics, right? So is there any message you would like to share with all the aspiring Swayambhus about these aspects which are so vital?
I think somewhere it's important for us to really imbibe these disciplines right in the early stage of our life. Okay. There are no shortcuts to life. Okay. There could be smart cuts, but that's about being curious and discovering new ways of doing things. But one must always remember when you're starting a career, your shortcuts will achieve what? That month's number. But if the fundamentals don't change, then is the next month number going to come? So we must be very conscious. A career is something which is going to span 30, 40 years of your life. And 1 month bad performance is not going to make a difference. Okay. And no boss is going to be uncharitable to any person for not achieving a number. No, that doesn't happen. So people must be clear that there are certain disciplines one needs to follow, certain ethics one needs to demonstrate in dealing. And if those don't cement your fundamentals, then you'll be very shaky in your career.
Right. Right, sir. So we'll also say thank you to our viewers. So thank you, Mr. Yogesh Kulkarni. Thank you, Pradeep G. Pai. Mr. Pradeep is the CMD of Hangyo Ice Creams, who are also our sponsors. Thank you, Mr. Devendra Shetty. Thank you, Jyotsna. Thank you, Kalpana. And Anil G. Garg is also here with us. Thank you, Anil
Oh,
G.
wonderful.
Thank you. May I ask a question on his behalf, sir?
Sure, please.
A question from Anil G. You talked about adversities also bring in opportunities. COVID-19 has been one of the biggest adversity which all of us have seen, except for the industries which are in healthcare. Would you like to share some experience during this period?
Okay, interesting. I would put it into 2 or 3 dimensions. Okay. The first dimension is in my role as a CEO of the company, Bisleri. I have an accountability to my consumers, my own organization and the people who work in it, and the stakeholders who are part of my business. So let's start first with the internal organization, because when COVID started, I think, okay, let's start with the consumer, because our business, if you consumers are not there, there's no business. So the first thing, right, when the lockdown was kind of imminent, we started planning in the early part of March itself that what are we going to do to ensure that supplies across the country are going to be maintained, irrespective of whatever is going to happen. So we kind of did a complete mapping of capacities, mapping of exigencies, and got ourselves kind of geared for it. The second thing we said, okay, we also need to ensure that there are certain protocols which need to be put into place to ensure the safety of our people and also the safety of the consumers in terms of the kind of products which you're supplying to them.
Right.
So, you know, we had put in these ozone tunnels, we had put in sanitization, which was anyway happening in some parts of the plant, but we made it mandatory across the place, temperature checks and all the kind of, there are, I think 16 or 17 checks which were there mandatory, and anybody with fever was not allowed. And, I'm talking about early March period.
Right.
We also ensured that the trucks which are going out, and that happened just after before the lockdown, are to be sprayed with alcohol and cleaned so that the consumer knows whatever is going to come from Bisleri is going to be completely sanitized, because that's a reassurance a brand like Bisleri need to offer to consumers. In terms of our people, we actually try to ensure that there are no disruptions to them. But in certain places like Bombay, where people used to come from very far away, we said, okay, if these guys are going to come from very far away, they're going to be exposed in one way or the other. Let's try and put them up in an accommodation which is closer to the factory, which can be monitored, so they are not in touch with population at large. So we housed them there for almost 4 months, very close to the factory. We were also concerned that in case we are going to be an ecosystem which is part of this country, then we could also have infections. So which means we need to protect our people. So we took insurance policies, medical insurance policies of a significantly high value for every single employee and every single contract packer. Okay. We were also fully in touch with the police and all the other authorities, because right in the beginning, when the lockdown started, there was a lot of confusion about what is allowed, what is not allowed. For example, water is an essential commodity, but the plastic which is used to make water was not an essential commodity. But unless you get the plastic, I can't prepare the bottles and prepare water.
Correct.
So, those things kind of took time to sort out, but we were working very closely with the government. Obviously, there were some hiccups, but I think I must also admit that I can't be too paranoid about that. That's something which happens in this kind of a mega issue. So we kind of sorted that piece out with all the regulatory authorities, worked very closely with the COVID warriors, as we call the police people. Okay, we used to supply free water to all the policemen who were on the roads, all the COVID centers, all that stuff. So that's one piece which happened in terms of managing supplies. We also ensured that every single factory was producing and supplying. We also understood over a period that the consumer behavior was changing. Consumer is no longer stepping out. Okay. So if I look at the entire ecosystem, two things happened. One is that there is a top-down enforced behavior which happened on the ground. Travel restrictions, hygiene, vulnerable groups not being permitted.
Right.
Then there is something called bottom-up embraced, which we consumers kind of took it upon ourselves. Our buying behavior changed. We were more paranoid about our health. Our hygiene practices themselves changed. My pharma colleagues tell me the infectious diseases are down. Reason is more people are washing hands today.
Right.
So, and your eating is, you are less eating out today. So your infections would naturally come down. So that is one dimension which has happened. Now, if you look at distribution, one of the challenges we had was about getting products to the market, because there was suddenly containment areas would come up. The houses inside the containment area require water. You are not able to reach it. So you had to kind of think smartly and create these hyper-local models. We also didn't want people to go and queue up for their water outside in the shops. So we said we'll activate home deliveries through e-commerce and run a campaign actually in e-commerce. In fact, somebody asked me, why are you spending money now? I said, there's a time when I need to tell people that don't step out. Bisleri will come to your home. Okay, so that campaign we kind of started. So then contactless sales, because in certain places, the salesman used to live, let's say, in a Badlapur and was working in a Worli. There's no way he could travel. Now, sitting in Badlapur, how is he going to connect with the shops which are open and then work with it, or operate within the channels which are open, like medical shops are open? But medical shops never have bought water in the past. But if that is the only shop open in that road, then they better start stocking water. So we kind of capitalized on that. We also had challenges. Your out-of-home consumption got impacted because people were not stepping out. Your hotels and restaurants have gone down. Fine, that's part of the ecosystem. But I think it's a new normal which we're trying to live with. Now, if you ask me, is it all gloomy? No, not at all. It is just that you need to adapt as an organization for a changing environment. Even forget about our organization. I am sure the entire market is opening up for logistics companies, IT services, pharma in a big way. new
Right.
models in FMCG and retail. I'm sure all this is going to happen because there's a kind of a churn which suddenly kind of, questions your established conventions of business. So it's a new normal, social distancing, health and hygiene. Income uncertainty is again another part of this entire thing. People are worried. So then that means you will become more thrifty. That will reflect you in your consumption pattern, the kind of products you buy.
Correct. So, from all the incidents you have mentioned, one thing I've understood is you take the problems head on. You don't run away from it. You face the problems and then you arrive at a solution. And that is how you are able to make an opportunity in every problem. So, we
But
have
I
got.
would I would be humble enough to admit that they also had experienced failures. Okay, when things don't work out well, fine. But I think it's like a boxing match. You can get knocked down, but getting up is more important. Okay, you have to get back on your feet and then be back in the game. So it's okay. It's okay to fail. Doesn't matter. I keep telling people, keep experimenting. Don't worry. Okay. In fact, I remember when I put one of my colleagues on a project, very, very radical project. So he said, boss, if this project fails, what happens? I said, you'll get sacked. So he just looked at me with wide eyes. I said, don't worry, you'll be more employable after that. Because there would be so much learning that would have come out of it. He didn't fail, obviously, he did well. But that's a mindset which you must approach anything. Okay?
Correct, correct. So you are a very good mentor. That's how you are able to, communicate and transfer your energy, your positive mindset to your team. Wonderful, sir.
Thank
So
you.
I will also say hello to our viewers. Thank you, Mr. Virendra Kamath. Thank you, Namita Karandikar. Thank you, Purnima. Thank you, Ms. Josna, Kalpana, Mr. Devendra Shete. Thank you. A question from one of our viewers, Rohini Chitle here. How far the demand and supply could be analyzed in view of certain plans and other issues to blend the different roles accordingly?
It's a very large question with a large canvas. Can you be a little more specific? Request her to be a little more specific.
Rohini, can you please rephrase it and send it again with specific point of view required? Meanwhile, I'll take another question from Anil Ji. Sir, can you list some technology pieces that the youngsters should add to their skills that will make them more equipped for a successful career?
I think one of the challenges, particularly in sales, if you ask me, learning skills, new skills is an extremely important piece because let us say from the time I started my career, some close to now, yeah, it's going to be almost 40 years, my God. Okay, from the time to now, I think the cycle is becoming shorter and shorter. At that time, possibly the dramatic changes would happen about once in 7 years, 10 years. Now, possibly that is kind of shortened, and every 2-3 years, you can see something big churn happening. Let's look at the market environment. I mean, the market environment of a modern retail took almost about from the late 80s to almost 14-15 years before it started making an impact on the national ground. But an e-commerce like an Amazon or let us say those things kind of stepped in a 3 to 5 year horizon. And now when you look at the kind of home delivery systems, which kind of gets established, or pharmaceutical products on over internet, these are things which you wouldn't have imagined in the past.
True.
So your entire ecosystem is changing at an alarmingly faster pace. If you don't adapt, and if you keep thinking about old conventional structures and servicing these developments, then it's not going to work out. Okay, because if you look at the current distribution model, the current sales and resourcing piece, the current skill sets people have, they're going to be differently required. Because in the past, I remember when I walked into Dabur, a guy used to go in a road, irrespective of the kind of outlet, there's one sales guy, one sales approach. So the first thing I said, 2006 was, they're not right. You need to have a different approach for a modern retail. You need to have a different approach for a pan BD. You need to have a different approach for a high grosser. And that's how we kind of restructured the entire sales system over there.
Hmm.
That's even more relevant now.
Hmm.
Secondly, from a consumer angle, I think the consumption patterns are dramatically changing. I mean, look at a category like deodorants.
Hmm.
20 years back, 30 years back, the deodorant was not there in the eau de cologne was possibly the only deodorant.
Hmm.
Now look at the shelves. There are, at least
Stacked.
10 to 12 meters of stacking, which you can see of all kinds of deodorants. Look at napkins or tissue boxes.
Right.
Can you think of these categories in the past and look at how much square feet they occupy in a shop today?
Hmm.
So the dynamics of the industry are changing on the other hand.
Right.
Communication. Look at the way people communicate and process information today.
Hmm.
I mean, there was a time when I remember I didn't even have a phone when I moved to my Cochin job in Unilever. I got my phone 1 year after I moved over there.
Hmm.
Okay. But today, it's instant. I mean, I'm on Twitter. The moment somebody doesn't get a Bisleri jar, he sends me a tweet at midnight. My jar has not landed. Now is connected. So the whole world is connected. So the organizations need to respond to very, very different ways of managing this entire change.
Right.
Operating practices change. I mean, I spoke to you about the data systems and the information systems, how they are changing dramatically. So gone are the days when information at the front end was not visible to you. Now it's all completely seamlessly connected is the way I would put it.
Right.
And this transparency brings with its own challenges because sometimes unpleasant
Two-way.
truths from the ground kind of hit you. But you need to be gearing yourself for facing that. But also that you could be under a huge amount of data overload. That guys can get, sucked into this whole thing that I want more and more and more and more data, and you end up doing nothing about it. So I remember in Dabur when we trying to put the dashboards, interestingly, that gentleman, it's a very curious case of finding somebody who was very smart, I used to go to Chennai for reviews in Dabur. And whenever I asked a question about any information or data, the guy would say, Arvinda, and in 1 minute, the information will be presented on the table. So at the end of the day, I said, who the hell is this Arvinda? Because he seemed to be some magical guy there who was cooking up something. I want to meet him. So I met him. He was a clerk sitting in the Chennai office. Very basic education, not even computer education, I think, and speaks only Tamil. But I knew this guy is bloody good. So I asked his manager when I was on the way to airport. I asked the manager, "Can I pick up the guy for head office?" So he said, "Boss, he won't come because he speaks only Tamil, and how can he settle in?" I said, "You ask him. I'll take care of him." And so it's not me finding. I think it's also him making that move and the decision that yes, I'm willing to risk it to come to a very different setting. I mean, so he joined my MIS team. He became my MIS manager. He worked with me, I think, for about 7-8 years over there. Groomed. He has gone to Dubai. Now is working in a different organization, even to Dabur Dubai, and then moved on to a very different company. He's possibly earning now about 20 times the salary he was earning in Madras. Okay. So when we put the dashboard, so he was very intuitively smart. And he learned Hindi and all that stuff. Now, when we put in the dashboards, all my managers said, "Mereko ye dimension bhi chahiye, wo bhi chahiye, ye bhi chahiye." That means 25 columns and 100 rows is what you're going to see as a dashboard. I said, "No, it doesn't make sense to me." So I said, "Arvinda, what do you think you should do?" So Arvinda said, "Boss, what fits in the screen is the number of columns you should have. They shouldn't be able to scroll to the right." So he said, "Very good. That means you can have only 8 dimensions which you can see at one point in time. If you have to include a new dimension, you need to take it out, one out." Okay. So this is also important because you shouldn't be overwhelmed with information. You should be able to condense that information into actionable pieces on the ground. So when a guy opens his dashboard, he should know, okay, among my 10 towns, these are the 2 which are not doing well. In those 2, this is a distributor who's not doing well. This is a locality not doing well. I should be able to narrow it down, And I think Mr. Garg played a huge role in terms of helping me set up this whole piece in when we work together as colleagues.
Beautiful, sir. So, in spite of having all data floating around you, it is important to have relevant data on which you can analyze and work on construction.
Only relevant data. Only relevant data. I would underscore it.
Perfect. 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 Sir, I will come to some basic questions which are generally associated with selling. Some say that the salesperson has to be very charming. Some say that he has to be very aggressive. So, is there any science behind it, or what is the role of aggression? How will you place it?
Okay, I think the aggression, when people think, there's a stereotype of salesperson in people's mind. Okay. Because typically what people perceive sales guy is a guy with a big mustache, and I don't have one. Okay, physically very, huge, overwhelming in presence, physical presence, and typically uses abusive language, because that is also a demonstration of the macho-ness of the individual. Bullshit. I would say it's a complete piece of crap. The aggression has to be in the mind about making something happen. Okay, it is actually about telling yourself again and again, because see, sales is a very lonely job. It's an extremely lonely job. You are alone there. Okay, most of the times you are alone. When you are alone, you need to keep reassuring yourself and again, don't worry, the first shopkeeper has kicked you out, doesn't matter. What went wrong? Think about it, reflect, let's make a new pitch. Okay, the second guy also kicked you out, don't worry. Which is the analogy I used about the boxer. You keep getting knocked down, doesn't matter, you have to get up again. The fifth shot, you'll be successful. Now, that doesn't come out of physical aggression of trying to threaten somebody, no. It's about a mental aggression about trying to understand the issue and then refine your approach. Okay.
Correct.
So sales is not a stereotype. You need not be sweet talking. No. In fact, a lot of times people tell you that guy told me the truth, and that's why I respected him. Okay. Sometimes unpalatable truth you need to communicate. Doesn't matter. That's how life is.
Sir, for a person to be a master in any field, there is a thumb rule of 10,000 hours of work, on putting on that skill so that you become an expert or a master. Is there some benchmark in sales also that you need to convince or convert X number of salespeople, and then you can think I'm done, I'm there?
I think I will go back to my analogy of cycle, motorcycle, car, and trailer truck. Okay, there is no end to learning. Look at from a trailer truck, I want to move to a ship now. Okay, in a CEO's position in an organization. The moment I want to go and berth my ship in the port of call, I need to start moving possibly 20 kilometers earlier. I need to start turning my wheel. Okay, so which means I need to anticipate the future and almost start turning my direction earlier on. Now, if I'm trying to tell this to a guy who's on a motorcycle, is he going to understand the dynamics? No, difficult for him.
Correct.
Because he would say the ship should turn as quick as my motorcycle.
Right,
okay.
right.
So the perspectives will differ. So to me, I think there is no end to learning. And I must be humble to say that you don't become a master of anything in this world. Okay, you are still a student till the end of your career, till the end of your life. You should be humble enough to admit that. There's nothing called mastery of anything. You possibly have understood some of the small dimensions of that space a little better than a few others. That's it. Okay, after 35 years plus, in sales and marketing, I possibly know a fraction of what is of that huge ocean. So that's the way I would put it.
Beautiful, sir. Sir, I think your graduation in zoology, and like you correctly mentioned earlier, that I started my career in a pharmaceutical company. I think everything you boil down to, the molecule atom level, sir. And that's how you are able to get to the heart of it, to the core of it. So I think you apply that everywhere.
See, always we believe that every concept has to be illustrated in a very simple manner. Now, for the people who are watching me, who try to understand big concepts. Let me just articulate an example sometime which happened in my Unilever days. Very interesting. Because we were from different functions and we were all undergoing a training course. So the trainer came and said, okay, each of you in one sheet of paper, those days it was acetate sheets, you had to draw and then put it on the projector and you see it on the screen before the laptops came in. You have to explain what you do to your colleagues who could be from manufacturing, from finance, from tax, okay, from whatever. And each guy had to explain. So I was in sales, I think, those days. So obviously it was more simple to say what is the flow of goods and how it happens, etc. Simpler to explain. Now, for a manufacturing guy to explain the manufacturing process of sabun was very complex. So he put all those, flow charts and explained so much. So that's one thing nobody understood. So then there was a manufacturing head who was there. So he said, okay, let me try and explain this in simple terms so that you guys get a grip of it. So the whole discussion was something about structurant pieces in sabun, which means you are trying to replace expensive oil with cheaper oils in the structure of the soap. That is the whole concept. So he said, okay, let me try and explain. Let me try and explain this whole concept as brick and mortar, which you use to construct a diwar, a wall. So assume that the brick are the non-soluble part of a sabun.
Right.
And the cement or the chuna you put over there is the soluble part of the sabun. So which means the soluble part of the sabun is what gives you the lather, the feel when you're having a bath. That is what releases the perfume. The brick part of it actually gets washed away. Now tell me, if it is getting washed away, does it matter if it is made of oil A, oil B, oil C? As long as the feel of the sabun doesn't get altered in any manner, because it's a brick, hard piece, which is non-soluble, it is getting washed away. So I can make it up with coconut oil, I can make it up with karanjia oil, I can make it up with rice bran oil. Okay, with coconut oil the cost is 100, with rice bran oil the cost is 20. Consumer doesn't even feel it. So what do? You replace coconut oil with rice bran oil because it's a brick which is getting washed away. But you put in some new ingredients in the mortar part of it, the cement or the chuna part of it, which will give you even better feel on the body. Everybody in that class understood structurants use in sabun with that simple enough explanation. We didn't go through the sulfonation process, the addition of this and that, and where oil comes and where fats come. No, nothing, no discussion. So sometimes analogies help understand big concepts in simple terms.
Correct. Sir, you simplify everything so well. I think that is the secret of your team doing so well along with you. You are a fantastic leader. You are able to share your experience because you have lived every experience, and that much of conviction is available on everything you share. Beautiful, sir. Sir, I solicit more questions from the viewers. Rohini, have you rephrased your question? Okay, there is a question from Rohini once again. The financial crisis can be reflected to review and ascertain the quality of certain products until the ultimate results. Anything on those lines, sir?
Financial crisis, just read it once again.
The financial crisis can be reflected to review and ascertain the quality of certain products until you get the ultimate results. So is there something you would like to share on those lines?
No, is the question about whether organizations tinker with the product on account of financial constraints which are imposed upon them in the ecosystem environment?
Correct.
Okay. My answer to that would be no. A very strong no. Because see, there are good days and bad days for everybody. So there are years in which you make money. Possibly there are months and years you don't make money. making money is not the only purpose of business. The purpose of business is to have a consumer and a customer. Okay, because they are the true lifetime value for the business. And there's something called a brand promise. Because a consumer is buying into a brand because of certain attributes. I can't water them down. Saying I'm making less money, I'm now degrading the quality of my brand. That's cheating, plain simple cheating. No. I wouldn't touch that brand if I can't afford it. I would possibly launch a cheaper brand for the consumer if the consumer is down trading in the value chain. But the main brand which is buying today and it's at a cost of 100, and today because of cost considerations, is not willing to buy at 100 but only at a discount. If I can afford it, I will offer him at a discount without diluting the quality. But if 60 or 80 is the price band he is seeking to buy, I will craft a new formulation, a new product for him, a new offering with a different brand promise. I think that's important.
Perfect.
So these are absolute long-term values. You're not in business for a day. Okay.
Right.
Our chairman keeps saying all the time, we are in business for 50 years now. So those values stay in the organization.
Perfect. Thank you, Prabhu Raja, for joining. And I read his name. I just want to ask a question on a lighter note. Sir, is sales very addictive? Do you get addicted to selling? Yeah.
In a lot of ways, yes. Okay. The nasha of okay, hit the thrill of numbers. It is true because I think the thrill when it is translated to getting the team together, okay, getting great amount of teamwork, it brilliantly works. I think one of my most enjoyable periods of my sales career was when I was in Bombay City, where we were the largest sales area in the country in Unilever, and we were growing the fastest. And we used to set a record for a highest monthly volume once in 6 months.
Okay.
So every single guy, the company guy, the distributor salesman, their delivery boys, everybody knew what number we were gunning for. And obviously when you hit that number, you have a great party, you have a great get together, but there's I would say that huge ownership of having delivered it. And without any of them, it wouldn't have been possible. If I was sitting and thinking I made it happen, complete bullshit. No. Because the distributors used to call up each other and say, Aapka number ho raha hai? Nahi rata, theek hai, I will manage you 50% of your drop. Then you tell that gentleman to make up another 50%. That's how we used to work.
So the progression, right. Perfect. So, but when you are addicted, I think you are also addicted, I suppose, because the way you are involved and passionate about things, whether they're directly or indirectly connected to your core job, I think you are definitely passionate about this too.
No, you need to be addicted, but at the same time, you need to keep detaching yourself, stepping out, up, and then having a longer term view. That you need to keep doing all the time. Okay.
Correct.
You have to come down and you have to keep going up.
Perfect. So how does one progress in a sales career? And you started your journey from sales and marketing, etc. And now you have reached the level of a CE, which is a designation for anybody. So from sales to what was in the journey that actually made it happen?
Okay. Let me tell you, honestly, if you ask me, did I have the destination in mind? No. Okay.
Hello.
At best, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Honestly, if you ask me, did I have this destination in mind?
We can hear you.
No, I did not have this destination in mind at all. Because in practically thinking, you see, when you're in sales, you tend to become very practical about life. You look at shorter time horizons. Okay, in this time horizon, what am I going to learn which is new? What is a new avenue which I'll create for myself? What is the opportunity that is there in the environment? That is what you'll keep looking at. But at some stage of your career, you discover that, yes, I think it is an inflection point where you can move into another level. Whether I started my career thinking I'll be CEO a day, no, not at all. I'll be stupid if I were to make that kind of a comment. Not at all. I mean, if you ask me at the beginning of my career, what was your ambition? To buy a bullet motorbike. That was my ambition.
But what supported this journey?
That's what I was.
Sir, so, sir, you have been handling sales so efficiently and so proficiently. So indirectly and directly, you get connected to all the departments of the organization. Is that how you organically rose to being the CEO, sir?
No, I did not become organically CEO of the company because I actually stepped out from Dabur and became CEO of a private equity, which we were managing a pharma business in Bombay, Ascent, which is a farm EC piece now, and then into Anchor, and then now in between a COO job with Timami, and then again with Bisleri. So this is my 1, 2, 3, 4th CEO stint or the apex level kind of a stint. I would say you, the moment you start becoming part of the management committee at a senior level, you start noticing how things work. Now, really speaking, if you ask me, I don't think you require domain knowledge of every aspect of the company. Okay, I may know nothing about tax. Doesn't matter. As long as I'm able to have a very competent person managing taxes, good enough. I think as you keep moving up, you will start realizing the job is really about managing people. Okay, or I wouldn't even call it managing people. I would say working with people. Okay, because they are the people who make it happen. You would never understand the technicalities involved in a manufacturing machinery. It'll take you years to understand that. You don't need to learn it. As long as you are conceptually, you are clear what you want to achieve. You're making it clear to the gentleman who's operating it that this is the cost efficiency that you're looking for, or this is the production efficiency you're looking for in terms of productivity. And you're giving him a logic why, he will figure out a way to make it happen.
Right.
Okay. So I think it's about working with people and showing them, because I mean, look at it. I have moved now in the last few years, 3, 4 companies. Do I know about this domain? No. Really no. I mean, were those companies successful before I went in? Obviously they were. So the companies were successful before you went in. Companies will be successful even after you come out. Okay. So if you think you're going to shake up the building, I think that's a stupid notion anybody should carry. Because those companies, I mean, look at Bisleri. It's a 50-year heritage of an organization. It's such a rich heritage about consumer centricity in the organization. Okay. So what I will add value in terms of enhancing the efficiency of the organization, getting more consumer connect, those are my challenges. Okay. But that will have to working with the people who are there, because there's a huge amount of legacy of knowledge that is repository of every company that you work with.
Right. Sir, your every sharing has been a beautiful blend of values, empathy, belief, and it is very obvious that you consider work as your worship, sir. Work is your worship.
I enjoy work.
Right, sir. Yes. It is so apparent in everything you share. And when you mentioned 40 years in the industry, anybody would have been complacent. Sir, how old are you? I think women can definitely ask.
You guess?
40 years of experience, around plus or minus 560.
Yeah, close there.
Okay. Great. Sir, we are truly blessed to have you today. I think the aspiring Swayambhus have understood, no matter where you are in life, your learning mode is so important, and being humble can definitely help you to connect with people better. And then that is what he says, invest in people and give them value forever. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
We couldn't
Thank
have
you so
asked
much.
for, yes, sir. It was not just sales. I think you have shared with us much more than what sales is all about, sir. We are very,
Thank,
very grateful for your time spent, sir.
thank you so
And a
much. And
very Swayambhu.
my simple piece of advice to the Swayambhus who are aspiring people: don't worry about where you start. It doesn't really matter. What you do with the opportunities that you get is all that matters. Okay, just keep that in mind. Okay, qualifications don't matter at all. I don't look at qualifications beyond a point. That's only the starting point. It's your fire in the belly, the passion for work, okay, and the dedication in what you do and the eye for detail. That's what will take you far in life. So all the very best to you guys. Do well. Hmm?
Thank
Actually,
you, sir. Thank
backbenchers
you,
do
sir.
better. Huh? I'm telling you.
I think that made our day. That made our day. So thank you once again for
Thank you.
underlining that point, because that is what it is all about, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. And wishing everybody a fabulous week ahead, and enjoy the weekend. A few more hours to go. And please stay connected with us. Post your questions and comments. Send us a mail, swayambhu@gmail.com. We are always at your service, and we are looking for internship options. We have already given internship opportunities to 15 candidates, and I'm so happy and proud that we have got fantastic mentors with us who are helping us in each and every level of need. Thank you so very much, guys. Thank you, sir, once again.
Thank you. Bye. Good day.
Jai Hind.